This is generally the reaction that I and many others have had to this, because the whole Israel-Palestine conflict, don't really care. None of my business. Even the Ukraine thing, which is a little closer geographically to where I live, don't really care. It's far enough away, it doesn't matter. Not my people. Whatever else. And I don't really think that my country even stands to gain strategically from getting involved. So I would rather they didn't. Some people are thinking that this guy is, well, I've heard perspectives from all sides of the compass, but the reality is, seemingly, that he is a deep leftist, big-time anarchist, and that he may not have done this for racial reasons or culture war reasons. It's sort of a weird cult thing almost. Let's read a bit about what happened. This is from Breitbart, who care, because I think Breitbart is invested in on the Israel side, but still, we'll get the basic details here. Air Force commander mourns death of airman who self-immolated. Now, most of this is very, very boilerplate. So the Air Force commander of a radical far-left airman who self-immolated while wearing his military uniform in front of the Israeli embassy as part of a political statement to protest Israel's war against Hamas, released a statement on Monday saying his unit was mourning his death, calling it a tragedy. She also said that they were sending thoughts and prayers. So it's all very boilerplate stuff. I won't even bother reading it because it's so boilerplate. Statement says Bushnell was a senior airman and cyber defense operations specialist with the 531st Intelligence Support Squadron at Joint Base San Antonio, Lackland, Texas, who had served on active duty since May 2020. Yeah, so he burned himself alive, which is the kind of thing which, I'd heard about for I think the Vietnam War, that there was some, it might have been the Vietnam War, there was like some monks that set themselves on fire. And I figured, hearing that, I cannot imagine anyone being able to resist the pain to actually stay through that happening. And there's a few caveats to that I'll get into next, but I figured, well, maybe if they're a monk, maybe they have the kind of rigorous mental fortitude to do it, but a normal person and a military person in a first world country, don't know about that. However, as far as I understand, the pain from being burned doesn't last very long until it literally melts your nerves away, and then you can't feel it. So that's probably what happened here. He may even have fallen unconscious from the pain, and then the rest of it, he just burned on the floor. Some Czech dude did that to protest communism. So yeah, it's if you cover yourself in gasoline and then light it, you probably are going to have a few seconds of intense pain, lose consciousness, and then burn to death. So it doesn't necessarily take much fortitude to endure it happening, but to actually do it in the first place, this is not just this guy's politics. This is something that he felt was more important than his life. And that to me indicates quite a lot of mental illness. So we'll read a bit from Front Page Mag now, which is a bit more daring. The airman who set himself on fire for Hamas was Antifa ex-cult member. If you had told, they say, the average person that an anarchist or an airman had set himself on fire to protest Israel's campaign against Islamic terrorists, they say, you would get two very different reactions. Unsurprisingly, the media led with the data point most likely to produce a favourable reaction, and Aaron Bushnell cynically played the same game wearing the wrong uniform to his Hamas suicide attempt, rather than the Antifa red in which he had been previously photographed. Interesting. The Washington Post gets around to admitting that Bushnell was an anarchist. Less than 2 weeks before Aaron Bushnell walked towards the gates of the Israeli embassy on Sunday, he and a friend talked by phone about their shared identities as anarchists and what kind of risks and sacrifices were needed to be effective. Lupe Barboza, 32, said she met Bushnell in San Antonio in 2022 at an event for a socialist organization. She said they bonded over their politics. She noted that the cult he grew up in was an American evangelical hardcore Zionist community society building. And that could also explain it. Quote, he was outraged and he knew that no one who is in charge is listening to the protesters out there every week, Barboza said. He knows that he has privilege as a white man and a member of the military, she said. But the Washington Post then misleadingly suggests he was raised in a Christian cult. Well, from what Daddy Bill just said, maybe it was both. Bushnell was raised in a religious compound in Orleans, Massachusetts, old Orleans, on Cape Cod, according to Susan Wilkins, 59, who said that she was a member of the group from 1970 to 2005. She said that she knew Bushnell and his family on the compound and that he was still a member when she left in 2005. So cult indoctrination. Wilkins said she heard through members of Bushnell's family that he eventually left the group. The group, called the Community of Jesus, imaginative name, has faced allegations of inappropriate behaviour which it has publicly disputed. In a lawsuit against an Ontario school where many officials were alleged to be members of the US-based religious group, former students called the Community of Jesus a charismatic sect and alleged that it created an environment of control, intimidation, and humiliation that fostered and inflicted enduring harms on its students. The school, now defunct, disputed the allegations. Wilkins also said it is common for members of the Community of Jesus to join the military, describing the transition as moving from one high control group to another high control group. This story is starting to make a lot of sense. All of this prompts the Washington Post readers to think that the Community of Jesus is some conservative group. The reality is COJ was a leftist cult, they say, that appealed to high-flying liberals. Interesting. They were two overweight, boozing housewives who hid their drinking, their harridan brawling, and their lesbian affair from all but a few obeisant, I've never heard that word actually, servants. They lived like royalty with a private plane at their command, a Jaguar, you've got a Jag, a Bermuda estate and a flat in England. And having founded an ultra-authoritarian Christian community that attracted the wealthy, the successful, and often the mind-bruised to their compound on Massachusetts' Cape Cod Peninsula. As word of the community's formation spread through New England and across the US, a handful of single women became the first to join, followed by young academics and professionals, people from businesses and government, socialite elite, refugees from the drug culture and hippiedom, many carrying the wounds of troubled and unhappy childhoods and looking for certainty in life, for rules, structure, and something to belong to. This is starting to sound like something a lot worse than just a random rural Christian group. This is starting to sound like it like the same sort of thing as the like the whatever the Grove thing is called. A 1985 article in Boston Magazine characterized the C of J members as a roll call from the social register and who's who. Executives or children of executives of major corporations, an ex-chairman of the global accounting firm that is now Ernst & Young, and former president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, an ex-assistant defense secretary, a former senior editor from Doubleday, a family scions of Texas oil and agriculture money, the daughter of a former president of the New York Stock Exchange, a Rockefeller heiress, Isabel Lincoln Elmer, self-styled Cinderella Rockefeller, celebrity Christians such as Jeff and Carrie Buddington, former hippie drug dealers featured in Life magazine. So the rich and famous, to a large extent. COJ's leading ladies appropriated Christianity to find an otherwise generic cult. They were not religious per se until they started to run a faith healing operation. They say if you doubt their politics, look at the laudatory New York Times orbit and the fact that most of the critical stories about COJ have come from conservative media outlets like the Boston Herald and Canada's Globe and Mail. Interesting. Who's the sort of person who would commit suicide in a graphic, public way for his politics? Aaron Bushnell was a former leftist cult member who hooked up with anarchist and socialist groups in search of an identity and then killed himself for their approval. He graduated from a cult to a death cult. Damn. Strong article. Like, before I read this, and before, like, when I had just heard the basic gist of what had happened in this case, there was a gap of explanation. I didn't know what explained why he did this. Now it makes sense. I mean, it's still an incredible thing for someone to have the willpower to do, for someone to feel it's so imposed on them that they do something about this, that it's worth killing themselves for. But if he's that mentally ill, that could explain it. What do you guys think, chat? Is there anything else we need to hear about this? I'll tell you what, there is one more thing that we need to hear, because there's a bit more to this story. It seems that Mr. Bushnell was not merely a self-immolator. He, in fact, we don't know this for sure, may have had additional fire-based abilities. According to this Reddit user, he posted on r/avatar memes, avatar as in Avatar the Last Airbender, and on r/avatar memes, he had a flare, which is like a little a badge on your account that you set per subreddit, of Firebender. We cannot prove this. I did try before the stream, but that is the claim. And it's a claim that's going around. Pug can prove it. In context null models, blah, 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 Bush one text Firebender. Yep. That's confirmed. That is confirmed. So, okay. not only everything else, but also he had the firebender flare on Reddit. Now, this implies to me that, okay, so some things about psychopaths. You can early identify a psychopath if they do a few things. If they abuse animals as a child, or if they play with fire as a child. And there was one other thing, but I forgot what it was. Those two things are important. Not all psychopaths are arsonists, and I assume not all arsonists are psychopaths, but there's, I think, a very strong crossover. It may very well be that he was the kind who, maybe not psychopath, but he was arsonist. He was obsessed with fire. And so this was the method he chose to do it. It's not, he didn't pick it specifically because it would be effective as a protest. That wasn't the main reason. The main reason might have been, and maybe he had always fantasized about dying this way, that it was about the fire. I wouldn't be surprised. We have 2 instances of him choosing fire over other options. What we can conclude from this whole thing is he was nuts, and if anything, his self-immolation should persuade us of the opposite of what he was trying to persuade us of, whatever that ends up being. But realistically, this reaction appears to be correct. Now, Motch, voice of compassion, am I being unfair to the man?
No, this dude appears to be genuinely insane.
Yeah. But he says he could have been replicating a similar event that happened last year where a pro-Palestine protester did the same thing but survived. Interesting. Daddy Bless says, are you saying he got off on that? Wouldn't be surprised. I think it's possible that him killing himself in this way was not just the act of one individual deranged man, that maybe there was others pushing him into it. That will be interesting if more about that comes out, but I suspect if that happened, it won't come out. Do not be a current thing, says Odai. Yeah, this guy died for a conflict which will be over and forgotten in a year or two, regardless who protests it. Anyway,